We got 6 episodes that were all fun and games, and then DanDaDan episode 7 goes and rips your heart out. The 7th episode of DanDaDan was absolutely heartbreaking. One of those experiences that provokes such a raw feeling and response. But how? The bones of the story, the events being communicated, don't achieve that kind of emotional resonance just by themselves. There are some key things worth looking at, from the segment being weirdly low on dialogue for the mile-a-minute DanDaDan, to all the impactful changes from the manga version. There's a lot to pick over for how this 22-minute slice resonated so much, why it was so gut-wrenching. So, the most heartbreaking slice of anime in some time. Of course, I'm talking about the flashback sequence in DanDaDan episode 7. Within the flashback, we get the general story. Single mother with numerous unsavory jobs to provide for her daughter, the most important part of her life. We see her teaching the daughter ballet, just like she had previously danced herself, and eventually, after losing her daughter, she'll dance again. The flashback being done the way it was, beyond simple events, that's what's elevated this episode. It's kind of a masterpiece. There are a few features I want to pick out specifically, starting with how the whole thing is presented. The animation has been amazing in DanDaDan, and it's the choices made in Adaptation that have pushed it to the next level, and made this sequence so heartbreaking. One thing that strikes me is the time we get for this. From the start of the flashback to the end, it's only 8.5 minutes long, which to sum up somebody's life, their goals, their trajectory, a tragedy, and then their death. It's not really that long, 8 minutes to tell the full story of someone's life. Now consider a low amount of dialogue, and that's some really impressive visual storytelling. Everything we do see in this limited time is building something. As a montage, it's as much about the order of the shots as what we physically see, building more of a tone of feeling than just filling out a story. We see acrobatic Silky working and doing some other things for money. Grimly, barely out of focus, and then using that money to provide for her daughter. These two things in alternate, but it's cut in such a way that we build a greater sense of the character. Cutting from the money on the nightstand, a pretty clear signal of what's happening, to spending some of that money on something for her daughter. The gap between the two scenes and having them smushed together repeatedly builds this emotional through line, builds it to such a frenzy that you feel it. You feel the weight of the emotion linking this woman. You feel her situation, and you feel the heartbreak. We get work home. Each shot builds the emotive message of the scene. The shots of her life outside of her daughter are out of focus. She's not the subject. We get this, where she's barely visible, quite literally not focused. The other side of these sections, the focus is on the nightstand, on the payment. It's completely disconnected from her physical acts. There's a deliberate visual shorthand here. The parts of her life that are out of focus, they're what she must do. They're not important. This is how she views herself. This is a flashback from her soul energy. We're seeing her point of view, her self-reflection, and it's how she sees it with these bits out of focus, with her daughter as the only thing worth focusing on. Visually, it's achieving so much. A lot of it might not be something that's noticed if you're not concentrating, but the focus being shifted visually clues you in. It builds the emotive point of the scene. These little manipulative shorthands, it makes it all heartbreaking. We cut from what she has to do to provide for her daughter to teaching her bits of dancing, something that without words we can see her passion for. We even see acrobatic Silky's ballet skills in the fight before, a little hint of that earlier life carrying over. But despite everything she goes through, she comes home to a smiling face. It's painting a genuinely haunting story about a debt spiral and a woman reduced to this. But you feel the brightness in her life from where the focus is. Putting the shots in this order, repetitive like this, it builds the feeling. It helps us build that connection and emotional investment in this woman. Even over such a short time, we get the sense of why, how much love this relationship brings into her life. We essentially see the outcome for her in the first scene, that without coming home to her daughter, there's nothing else. Everything else is out of focus. That feeling that wells with the music throughout. By the time we reach a change in the sequence, my heart was already breaking. But we built up such an emotional connection with Acrobatic. Through so little being said, it's like that opening sequence in Up. It's limited shots, limited dialogue, but it makes the turn that's coming so heartbreaking. Make you wish there was a kinder world. One of the most striking things is how few words are used in this flashback segment. There's 5 lines spoken before she dies, one for the mum, one for the daughter. What's interesting is what these lines are. They aren't needed strictly for storytelling. They add emotional heft. All of the dialogue is focused around her daughter. Acrobatic doesn't speak to anyone other than her until her growls at the end. The woman is largely passive in her own sequence, in her own life, presumably in some kind of debt spiral and doing whatever she has to, trying to give her daughter a better life. As the light and focus of her world is her daughter, the only part of the sequence given vocalization is this too. Compare this to the rest of DanDaDan, where lines are spewed at an incredible pace. It's really quite a change. It's something. It puts the focus on the visual. It takes the gamble that this alone will be enough to do the storytelling. The storytelling in this sequence isn't just the smaller amount of dialogue, but the absence of it too. The daughter gets the most impactful line. We're seeing this flashback from the point of view of Acrobatic Silky. We get the daughter's lines because that's what matters to her, and no dialogue from her outside of the traumatic end's growls. Much like her life being out of focus outside her own daughter, her agency has been completely taken away too. Her lack of lines tells us so much about how she views herself, more than any dialogue segment could. The visual storytelling alone is impressive. One of the best emotive devices employed here is the sound and the way the dialogue is structured. Just like the focus in the montage, the use of sound is so finely tuned for that gut punch to point the focus on these emotions. It's really something. This sequence is fantastic in the manga too, but the adaptation of DanDaDan has really been quite special. I've already talked about the first arc in a different video, but this single episode puts a lot of that adaptational flair in focus. The number of changes from the manga, they're small but impactful. They say a lot here. One big change is that it's much less specific about Acrobatic Silky's extra work. The subtlety here doesn't mean what she's doing is any less obvious to the viewer, it just adds a kind of nuance. Doing it out of focus implies more about the character's headspace, separating out parts of life from others. It adds subtlety to the character. By shifting the focus in these scenes, we understand what's happening, but we feel a bigger connection to how Acrobatic views her life, what her focus is on. The next major change is the death, which is much less explicit, less open to interpretation in the manga. It's more of an artistic take on it here. It's putting the focus on more interpretive visuals rather than getting the plot details specific, getting across the emotions rather than the literal events. This doesn't take anything away from the story by making it a bit vaguer here. We get a little more nuance, actually. The manga chapter itself already had plenty of ambiguity. It's shorter, I mean, like with what exactly is happening when the daughter is taken, but if anything, the changes here help us to understand Acrobatic's point of view, her feelings, much more than just understanding what happened to her, which given the nature of the flashback, it makes sense. It also better develops the emotional heft of the sequence. We're really getting inside her head. The whole focus thing with her outside life being pushed back isn't as present in the manga. She's silent throughout, which gets the tone across, but with the benefit of having, movement, the adaptation can take advantage of things like focus and silence, and it really does. There's even more fleshing out of the central daughter relationship compared to the manga. Again, this is largely disassociated scenes, more to build that connection between the viewer and Acrobatic Silky. It's a way to further that bond, to make the end more impactful. It's kind of a result of the adaptation as a whole. If you've read and watched both, let me know down there how you felt about the extension of the segment. I'm curious if anyone is not a fan of what the animation did with the extra space. This only adapts roughly 10 pages, which isn't that many, but the extra space in the anime really helps turn episode 7 into a masterpiece. The manga for DanDaDan is fantastic, but a good adaptation should take advantage of the change in medium, and this is a masterclass in that. Right before Acrobatic Silky falls completely, she gives a monologue about what she's done, what she regrets, and her life is saved thanks to her giving up her own, but Ira steps in to give her some peace, and to hope that there's a kinder world ahead. Just like the souls we saw in the earlier episodes, it adds this humanity. It's amazing. The most emotional, gut-wrenching part of DanDaDan to date has been the flashback for one of its monsters. Ira embracing her while promising not to forget her. It rounds off this character's introductory arc too. It's easy to forget in this beautiful flashback, but just a couple of episodes ago when we saw her faking out Okarun, she bragged that he'd never forget her, and then in the end, she promises to never forget Acrobatic. That's some growth here, along with putting herself out there to help someone. Even in this segment that's completely divorced from our core cast, it gives us closure on them too, for experiencing the story the same way that we did. I mean, when we came out of it, I'm glad Momo was also reacting like this. It made me feel a little better about how I was reacting. Episode 7 of DanDaDan is gut-wrenching. It's probably going to go down as one of the single best slices of anime. It really was something special. Hey, thanks for sitting through this, especially if you saw my video on the first arc, which came out like a day later than this episode. Terrible timing. Subscribe if you want to see more. Cheers.
Crying in the corner, huh? Mind if I join you?